This session is quite imperative for us to discuss, as it's going to support HR practitioners with the practical skills that they would be using to support their businesses in these trying times of COVID-19 epidemic. We would have 6 panelists that will be discussing this topic today. But before we go further, we have a message from the president of CIPM, Mr. Adewale Adediran. The video will be coming up now. All right, the video will be coming up any minute from now.
Hello, my professional colleagues. I'm Wale Adediran. I want to put out 3. Hello, my professional colleagues. I'm Wale Adediran. I want to put out 3 key messages to our HR practitioners community in Nigeria. And the 3 key messages have to do with what we need to do as leaders in this profession to help manage the crisis. My first message to you is your role is to manage panic and ensure that false information and fake news does not escalate the crisis, especially as it impacts your businesses, ministries, agencies, and departments in government. Second message is you need to step out and lead. Stepping out to lead means you know enough about the coronavirus and the COVID-19 disease. Stepping out means you are able to provide proactive solutions that will help your businesses, your ministries, departments, and agencies over the next 3 possible crisis scenarios that we may have over the coming weeks. Therefore, I encourage you to be part of a webinar that we're holding tomorrow to provide information about the disease and the virus itself, to help you with some of the great ideas that are coming from some of our colleagues in the HR community. Things that you could do that will not only help your ministries, your departments and agencies and businesses, but will position HR as key leaders and critical stakeholders in managing businesses and public service in our country. I look forward to having you on the webinar tomorrow. Thank you very much.
All right, welcome back from that short message from the president. Our moderator for today, Mrs. Funke Amobi, has joined us now. You're welcome, ma'am. Before I hand over to her, I would like to introduce the panelists. Mr. Hussein Udo is the Chief Group HR Officer at Dangote. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. I am here with 2 of my colleagues, Mr. James Adenuga, who is a lead in our health, safety, social, and environment practice.
Okay.
And Dr. Eze, who is a medical consultant for these kinds of emergency and setting up a rapid response protocol for this emergency. Yeah. Dr. Eze has also joined us.
You're welcome, sirs. Thank you so much. Next, I'll be introducing Mr. Shola Akinyosoye, is the head of HR at Nestle. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you so much, madam. My pleasure to be here.
All right, thank you. Next, I will introduce Mrs. Alero Onosode. She's the Group HR at Seplat Petroleum Development Company. You're welcome, ma.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Next, I will introduce Mr. Gbemiga Owolabi, the Director of HR at Airtel Network. You're welcome, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
All right, thank you so much. You're welcome. And this morning, permit me to introduce our chief host, the CEO Registrar CIPM, Ms. Busola Alofe. You're welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thanks very much for being here with us.
All right, thank you so much, ma'am. So I would be handing over to our moderator this afternoon, and our moderator is Mrs. Funke Amobi. She's the country head, Human Capital at Stanbic IBTC, and she's the chairman of the Learning and Consulting Committee at CIPM. You're welcome, ma.
Thank you very much, and thank you, CE, for having all of us. You're welcome, colleagues. I'm also joined here today by I have with me Dr. Sylvanus Jatto, who's the medical consultant for Stanbic IBTC Holdings PLC. Colleagues, I'd like to thank our panelists for joining at such short notice. Colleagues who have joined us in this community, we're going to be deliberating this very topical subject matter and how it impacts our work as HR practitioners. We look at all the HR imperatives. How should we be responding? What are companies doing? The truth is that we woke up one beautiful morning and COVID was upon us. How do we expect that we have responded in appropriate manners that we would say to our businesses, it couldn't be better than this? The objective of this session is to help us learn from one another, share experiences across the sectors. We've got oil and gas, FMCG, we've got manufacturing sector, public sector, and we've got the financial services sector. I'm sure we couldn't cover all the sectors, but definitely we know we've got enough in the room to be able to go around. I'm going to start the session with Mr. Use Udo. You know, the subject of communication is a big one that has received a lot of attention in the subject of COVID-19. What to communicate? Who should be communicating? We all have had information overload. So on your WhatsApp, every second you're receiving something about COVID-19. As far as our workforce is concerned, effective communication strategies in this area. What are your thoughts around this? What's been your experience? How have you managed the subject of communication to be sure that our employees are well informed? What are we informing them about? Who's informing them? And what are the best practices around this? Use, would be happy to have your views in this regard.
Thank you very much, Funke. And thanks to our team for organizing this. This is absolutely crucial at a time like this. When it comes to the issue of communication, the first thing you want to get right is the clarity of the information you're putting out there, how authentic it is, and how easy it is for people to understand what they need to act on or what action they need to take. And obviously, for you to do that properly, you must make sure that you have brought along all the parties that are responsible for ensuring that the information you're putting out there is accurate and is timely. What has been our experience in this? There are basically two sets of information that come out. The first set of information is that which educates the staff. That we typically have our corporate communications unit solely responsible for putting out that kind of information. They become the single unit through which we push out all information that is informing staff, educating them about this crisis, about the disease, and about the virus. And there's extensive research happening within our health and safety team, working with our doctor, who I believe would speak to the details of the disease later. And the corporate communications is the singular unit that puts out any information. When there's a crisis also, or where there are scares like we had in Dangote, it's only the corporate communications unit that is allowed to speak on behalf of the company. Now, that is uneducating. Now, in terms of managing our staff, managing the welfare of the staff, ensuring that the staff are catered for, they have a place where they can go to if they have any issues and they want clarifications. Like this morning, somebody walked in and wanted clarification. Some of them just want to be assured. Then the HR unit becomes the sole area where the information comes out from. And we have in all of our businesses, the group HR people for those businesses, they are constantly validating their information with the center, directly with me, and being coordinated by the health and safety team. And we are all speaking out of the same page. So when it comes to assuring staff, talking about staff welfare, your HR person is your singular control point. When it comes to educating and dealing with the public, your corporate communications team should be the sole unit. It's important for you to have these units and these channels of communication very clear, very specific, so that we are not falling all over ourselves in the organization and you don't have people putting out conflicting messages. It's better to resolve all your conflicts internally and make sure that the message that goes out is consistent and clear.
Thank you very much. And that's really, really very important. Communication is the starting point. So it's, from what I've heard you say, it's a no-no not to communicate. It's not at all an option to say nothing. So the institution must have a communication hub and be deliberate about who is communicating, what is to be communicated. It also helps when you choose to ensure that the concerned parties, for example, your clinical person should have an input when you're communicating something on the subject of COVID itself. And your security person should have an input when you're communicating something security. Also to add that the corporate comms, who are the experts at this, they know exactly how to put out the comms. In our environment, you ensure that you also need to speak to the customers. So when you need to communicate to your customers, how do we go about this? I'm going to be asking Gbemiga to help us. In the telecoms world, there, customers, you need to deal with customers. Did you need to communicate with your customers? How did you go about this? And is there something we can learn from this area from you? Thank you, Gbemiga.
Okay, thanks very much, Funke. Look, during this time, this is when the communication telecoms sector is actually very important, because you have people that will communicate with each other. You have people, because most of the people are actually now sitting at home and doing remote working. You have them actually now, requiring more data to actually operate. The school children are at home now and they are being taught through the Google Classrooms and online facilities that is available. Everybody is now using the telecom services. So it's actually very important when it comes to how do we actually communicate with our customers in order for them to be able to actually run their lives and also be able to cope during this period. So one of the ways that the telecom sector has been doing this is to be able to give out an assurance to all the customers that, whatever happens, we're actually going to operate and we can actually cover all your needs. If you look at even in Europe now, there's already a 50% jump in terms of the data being required to operate within the continent. And so you see people are actually also getting worried as to whether the telco sector itself can actually work on this. The other way that we also communicate with customers is that, look, do we also give advisories? Do we set text messages through our own platforms in order to be able to guide customers too in how to operate within this time frame? So when advices are also being sent to customers, either through when phones are ringing and you're also hearing some COVID advisory, it does help people to get assurance that, this is the way how we can operate. This is the way how we can actually live within this period. And even if the government also wants to pass some messages to people, to the citizens on very urgent requirement, then they can also do it through the telco sector itself. So various means is possible for the telco to do that. Even in our own shops too, you also see us providing leaflets that also guides people in terms of, okay, how do you cope with the COVID? How do you cope with this crisis? And what are the next things for you to do? You go into the shop, the guidance as to what to do and also how to practice respiratory hygiene is also available for you, to help. So in this time, the telco sector is actually very key when it comes to communication. And that's what we do through the customers.
Thank you very much indeed, Gbemiga. We have two doctors in the room. I'd like to hear from the medical people. What should we be communicating to our people, at a time like this when there's a deadly disease in the environment? Can we hear very quickly from the medical consultant for Dangote? I believe he's there with Use. Can we hear very quickly what should we be communicating?
Good day, everyone. For the communications now, to prevent, because the issue on ground is majorly communication of wrong information, false information, all through. So for you to be able to streamline what to communicate, we encourage everyone to try to get information directly from the NCDC in Nigeria or the Ministry of Health, then from the WHO, because they give more of informations that are research-based. There's a lot of false informations going all around the whole place. So like for us, we try to, even with the information, we try to streamline all our informations to just the informations gotten from approved bodies. So that way you're not giving misinformation, because there are a lot of research going on now, and in the interim, there'll be slight informations like the current information on chloroquine used to manage COVID-19 and all that, but they are all research basis. So the information should be approved from WHO or the NCDC or the Ministry of Health, just to make sure you're giving the appropriate information. That's what we advise.
Okay, thank you very much. This imperative of communication cannot be taken lightly, evidently. We need the experts in the room, as we've learned from the practicing organizations. I'm going to want us to go to the very, very next, but very hot imperative, HR imperative of this COVID-19, and that's the imperative of risk management. How have we experienced managing the risk, containing the risk? And I'm going to ask us to combine that with the imperative of well-being. How have we managed the risk? How have we quantified the risk, qualified the risk, and what strategies have we put in place? What measures have we put in place to manage the risk in relation to our employee well-being? I'm going to first of all ask the medical consultant. I want us to hear from a medical person first with regards to, well-being and risk. How have we profiled? What is the risk that is in the room as far as our employees and the workplace is concerned? I'm going to invite Dr. Jatto to very quickly, Dr. Jatto, help us. What are the immediate thoughts around this?
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. So what I would just say that in terms of the well-being of the staffs, the paramount information will be those information that will protect the staff from the current challenge that we are facing. What are the specific things that this must be clearly itemized for staff so that they begin to carry out those actions that are required. And this has to be repeated over and over and over again regularly so that they are constantly to get the right updates on the spread. This information must go up as for this. Their well-being will contribute significantly to the sustainability of business in this period. So we need to emphasize on that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Jatto. This is what I'd like us to get. I'd like us to move into the practical strategies. What have you done in your respective organizations to manage the risk of spread? So firstly, an employee says to me, how am I sure that if I go to the office, I will not contact COVID? How am I sure that if I speak to a customer, I'm in the service industry, I'm speaking to a customer as a teller, how am I sure that I've been protected? What are the practical things we've done to manage the risk of spread as far as our employees are concerned and our customers are concerned? We know that many organizations have put sanitizers outside, giving their staff sanitizers, ensure customers use sanitizers. What are these practical measures that we have deployed? And I'm going to be asking that Alero, please help us in this regard to start the motion on that. I'd like every panelist to tell us what are the practical things you've done to manage the risk of spread and to make sure that prevention is going on in the workplace. Alero, is Alero online?
Yes, I am.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Funke. And I think, the key risk is this is really uncharted waters. In as much as we've had previous epidemics, in my work life, I know I've not seen a pandemic before. So really not knowing what it is that we're dealing with and how it's spreading and how fast it's spreading, I think is actually one of the key risks, and it just continues to heighten the need for us to pay attention to the individuals and their safety and well-being. I was just listening to a video chat of a gentleman who said the hospital is not being in contact. He doesn't know. Nobody knows how he got it. So really important that the individuals themselves are educated in terms of how they take responsibility for their well-being and the well-being of all those around them. One of the first things we did was, from about January when all of this started, was to start the screening in the offices. So as you come in every morning, we screen for temperature. We make sure that the sanitizers are available all around the building. We started the education from the health and safety talks. About January, February, we've been on that journey. Now, as it becomes a lot clearer that in terms of transmission, the pandemic was going to start, we've also now, even ahead of the government, insisted that anybody who travels or comes in cannot come to the office for 2 weeks. So you must self-isolate from any business travel. And we've even also gone to tell employees that not just you traveling, if any member of your family also travels or comes into contact with, comes into the house, you also are required to self-isolate. So any point at which you are exposed, and there is comfort around it. It isn't as much as being penalized for not being able to show up at work, is making sure that the supporting infrastructure is there for people to work remotely, but giving them the confidence that they can step up to say, I've traveled, my wife traveled, my child traveled, or somebody is coming to the house, and for that reason, I'm going to have to work remotely. And we insist on the 2 weeks isolation. I think one of the key challenges, of course, is as in many organizations, you have lots of leaders actually doing a lot of the traveling as well. So we're actually at a point now where probably half of the leadership team is in self-isolation because they have had to travel. So it's also getting the leaders to lead by example and stepping aside at this time to say that even for me, I will not expose anybody to any danger in the workplace. And I think it really sends a strong message when you have your leadership support on a journey like this.
Thank you very much, Alero. And I think that we're now getting into the practical space. How are we managing travel? Travel management, I think when social distancing is an imperative, then the first area is travel management. And I'm glad that you exposed us to what you're doing with regards to getting your employees to declare their travel plans. And in my organization, what we actually did was, for starters, a complete ban on travel. All business travel embargoed. Ensure that you don't travel locally, you don't travel internationally, so there's no official requirement on you to travel. Then there's the personal travel space. So I'm on holiday as an employee. What am I supposed to do differently? How does this present a potential risk to my other colleagues in the workplace. We're talking about effective strategies for managing the workplace in a COVID-19 situation. I'd like to hear from Usain. Alera has told us official travel, we put our hands on it to say, if you have been on travel, you will go into a self-isolation, which is pretty much what we did to firstly travel ban, no further business travel, even if it is business enriching, we put it on hold. Then if you've gone on travel, we went a step further to say, if you've been out of the country from this date, you will proceed on a 14-day self-isolation, quarantine period. But what about my personal travel? I have decided to travel on holiday, or a secondary person to me has traveled on holiday and has returned, a spouse, a child. Is there any insights, any ideas you can give us, anything you've done in that area? Usain, I will also be going to Gbemiga to talk about that shortly.
I will speak to this point, but I would like James to take us through the very structured framework that we put in place in January. Actually, we put it in place back in the Ebola time, because as you would know, we had a major hit at that point, particularly because of the fact that things were happening in Sierra Leone. And we did have some kind of operation there. So we learned our lesson from there. And that framework has been in place since then. And we also have we are probably the only ISO certified manufacturing firm, which has dealt or put in place a very deliberate business continuity plan. So I'd like James to speak to all of the framework we put in place around this and how we've managed it. And then I will then just recap at the end. So James.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks, Funke, and it's been really beautiful so far. So just taking it from the top in terms of the kind of structure we put in place, which we kind of just triggered, pretty much existing before, which is the business continuity management system framework. So the first thing we did was to kind of, we talked about risk earlier. We did like the profiling and identification of the risks of what we're talking about. So we do a risk prioritization and then an escalation plan. So based on that, we put together an action plan, and then that got the endorsement of executive management, because that will involve some financial commitment, laws, and the rest of it. So once that got signed off, the next thing we then did was to straight away engage with medical consultants. And these triggered a 13-point action plan. At the top of that list is what you just started talking about, which was for every HR personality, HR leader for all our businesses to generate a list of people who are staff and contractors who
Hello.
Hello.
I think people can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me?
You need to be more audible. People can't hear you at all.
At all?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Hold on a minute. Let me check now. Is it better now?
Yes, better now.
Okay, I think my mic was very dumb. Can I just continue after recap? Okay, I'll start from the first action. The first action was for all the HR, after doing like a risk prioritization and control plan and the strategy, that evolved into an action plan.
We're still not hearing you, Mr. James.
Okay.
I can read the text from people saying.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Is that better? Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I have to then. Okay, good. So following this risk prioritization and control assessment of where we are, what's involved, what is likely going to take, worst case scenario, this led us to developing an action plan. And this action plan got the endorsement of executive management, because this will require some financial commitment and other kinds of resources. And then there was we engaged a medical consultant who were involved at the Ebola era, quite experienced, epidemiologists of repute. So it was a team of expert medical guys. Together, we developed a 13-point action plan. rolled out across the business. Yeah. And the first thing in that action plan, which speaks to your last point, was for each of the HR and HSE in each of the businesses to identify workers, generate a list of workers, staff and contractors who have traveled in the last 15 days. We started this in January. So from the 15th of Jan, yeah. So from that point, we now started looking at, okay, if they have traveled, are they back? And then if they come back, they are subjected to a medical questionnaire, which was developed by a medical consultant. And then we started going through travel ban. So we then, obviously this progressed because we've had like 4 versions of a good travel advisory. So the recent version obviously is more current in the light of information from WHO and what is happening across the world. So we have 4 classifications of countries, right? So, so the level 3s and level 4 were the countries where we said 0 travel, level 4 don't travel at all, coming or going. Level 3, if there's been travel or in the course of travel you pass through these countries, you then have to go through 14 days self-isolation. And then there were also guidelines. So there are various protocols developed, which included things like handling, isolation, holding area, quarantine, training people, the kind of information we push out, the forms of information after being pushed out. Then the key thing here also is then monitoring. There was a daily monitoring that was taking place, which was then reported across the patch daily. The governance of this, as I round up, was then the setup of a group task force. This had representation of HR, HSC, and business leaders across our businesses at Pan-African wide. And we met weekly on a Zoom meeting to review the status of implementation of these actions, and then we escalate accordingly. So this is continuing, but pretty much it has led to a lot of things, which some of the things we've already talked about in terms of screening, thermal scanners, and linking with the local authorities and right of it.
I think just to add to what James has said, I see there are some comments around the need to summarize what James has said. The basic thing there is you need to put in place a very structured framework for ensuring that your staff, both locally and internationally, are protected. And when we say protected, usually we think it's just what the staff does. The action of the person sitting next to you can actually put you at risk. So we need to put in place frameworks that ensures that we are responsible for not just ourselves, but the people around us. And that must be communicated consistently, and it must be monitored. The second thing is, as this develops, and I don't mean to scare people, the address from the president made it very clear. This is to educate, but we also need to watch the statistics and watch the trend and watch how this evolves. The evolution is not new. The way viruses evolve and the path they take is not new. It's been proven over the last 100 years. So there's no, we can pray, we should pray, but there is a pattern and there's a path that this would take. The numbers would climb, they would crest, and then they will fall. During that climb and crest period, we need to manage that. So what we have done is, starting from Monday, for example, coming out of this exercise, we made sure that if you're over 60 in Dangote, we're going to get that approval today. You should work from home if you are at high risk. Visitors into the premises, if you do not, unless it's a critical maintenance, don't accept visitors onto our premises anymore. 0 visitors. And if you must come in, there are standard protocols that you must adhere to. Hand washing, sanitizing to come in. So some of those immediate initiatives, which are things you have, as the part of this disease develops, all of that you have to be putting in place. Even after this, you have to think through whether to decongest the office. It's a continuous thing, and it's a journey that is going through, that we are going through.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Usei. I think that was a lot, and I took 2 things away I'd like us to dwell on some more later on, because at the end of this is every HR practitioner logged on should be able to reflect over their own practical strategies and initiatives, workplace management strategies, looking at all the key HR imperatives. I think we've dealt a lot extensively with travel management. The subject of going away for 14 days and being quarantined, I'm going to ask Dr. Jatto to speak on that later on. What is the implication for HR when we say people should go away for 14 days and be quarantined? But I picked up a subject matter from Use's comments, which is what specifically are we doing? Structure, how do we put structure into what we're doing? We set up what we call a crisis management team that meets every day. Different stakeholders are in that subject. HR is just one. Every other person that should be making one decision or the other relative to this is on that call 1 hour every day. So we're reviewing what is the situation, what should we be doing differently? Who is accessing? I've heard third party should not come into the environment. What do we do differently? The manufacturing space. I'm going to ask Shola to please give us, what are your practical tips? How have you combated employee wellness and prevention of spread within your workplace as a manufacturing outfit? Shola on the line, Nestle. Shola.
Yes, please. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Look, we are in a specific, very peculiar situation because, again, we are manufacturing a lot of people on the shop floor, and that goes on us the responsibility of ensuring that we put effective measures in place to protect ourselves. One key thing we've done, apart from taking temperature, apart from ensuring that people are using hand sanitizers and all that, we also try to enforce social distancing. Very important for us that people keep this distance at work. Now, not just in the head offices, we also ensure that is happening also across factory. To start with, we ensure that we only limit meetings now to very critical business meetings. And even for those meetings, we try to reduce the number of attendees to such meetings, just to ensure that you don't have so many people in the same space at the same time. Even for the canteen, we've extended our hours that people will spend in the canteen in such a manner that we can reduce the number of people that will go to the canteen at the same time. We even rearrange the sitting arrangement in the canteen, so that probably for table where you used to have 6 people sitting before, we reduce to 4. And we also will tell you that, look, this category of employee can go between this hour and this hour, and place when you finish, you leave the canteen. Just another way of ensuring that we maintain this social distancing. Now we also ensure that people that are coming to our premises, visitors, we make them to fill some questionnaire at the end, either in the factory or in the head office. And we are clear to them the reason why we need this information, so that people don't think we are just collecting their data. Now, when you declare some of this information, out of where you have been in recent time, have you been to some of these countries that are highly infected? Have you traveled through any of these countries? Have you visited recently anyone that is sick? Or are you exhibiting any symptom? Now, when you fill this form, depending on your answers, we can deny you access into our premises. And if we allow you into the premises, again, we can limit where you go within our premises. So this is another measure we have introduced. We ensure that people complete this questionnaire. This is important for us also, not just for our premises, it's also important for contact tracing. Just in case of anything, we will be able to trace back, at least to say this particular person visited at also time. We have your telephone number and all that. Now, another thing we've also done is for our staff buses, because we have staff buses that convey our staff from to and from work. Again, we have also tried to ensure that we rearrange, again, the sitting arrangement in staff buses, reduce the number of people that go in these staff buses per shift. We also ensure that we have sanitizers inside the staff buses. We also ensure that when the particular shift resumes, someone goes into the staff bus to ensure that they are sanitized. We clean up the place before another set of employees will go into the staff bus. So these are some of the concrete steps that we have taken, given our peculiar situation as a manufacturing company, to ensure that we keep our employees safe within our locations.
Thank you very much, Shola. We're getting into that practical space where I'd really love for all panelists to open up on this level and share with us the initiatives that you have rolled out, because this is the objective of this session. All HR practitioners to review their current status and ensure that they have strong and potent strategies in place to manage the workplace at this material moment. I like the social distancing strategies that you shared. And at Stanbic IBTC, also to build on that, we actually limited and communicated the limit, not more than 10 people in any meeting at any point in time. Any meeting where you name more than 10 people must be done digitally. Of course, it meant that the technology people would have to ensure that you've got the bandwidth to carry all the meetings that need to go on, because work is still going on. So your Microsoft Teams, your Blue Jeans, your Zoom, all of those facilities must be working and providing that support to enable that to happen. I like the staff bus management as well. I think this is an excellent consideration for all of us to take away. Staff bus management, because staff bus must still move. And for us too, it was a consideration to say, we cannot ask staff buses not to move, but what do you do differently? The cleaning, continuous cleaning, and ensuring the distancing. In the office environment already, so the cleaning company comes in now 3 times to clean, morning, afternoon, evening. Wipe all the desktops, ensure that the common environment clean desktop policy is strictly enforced. Your desk must be clean so that when they come to wipe, they will wipe efficiently. I'm going to ask us to ask any of the other panelists, Mimika, please share with us if you have any additional social distance strategies that you have deployed, either in your customer environment, in your call centers, or in your waiting areas, your sales environment, or better still, also in the office environment, social distancing strategies.
Okay, Funke, thanks very much. I think one of the, in addition to what everybody has mentioned, in our shop, starting this weekend, we're even, instead of sitting arrangements, creating space between people in order to ensure that at least you put 1 meter amongst people, because our shops is a major footfall for people, Nigerians. So if you go into the shop, by tomorrow, you should actually see space being created between people. And one of the things that we're also planning to do is that of also putting stickers on the floor in terms of creating space. So if you're going to queue up in the shop, what is the distance that you need to maintain? And you can easily do that one just by putting the stickers on the floor so that people stand apart and they are not together. Yes, we do, you know, most meetings are now digital. We're a telco company and we actually reduce it to 5. So if it's going to be a meeting of more than 5 and you can't sit within 1 meter of yourself, then it goes digital. Everybody in the business is on Zoom facilities, so there's really no complaints about that. And then you can also work from home. Even if you are remote working, you can still conduct your meetings or via Zoom. And interviews, we've actually stopped in face-to-face interviews now for the past 1 week. If interviews are going to happen, we send a link to the candidates and the interviews are done through the in a digital way. So different things that we're doing, trying to make sure that, you know, there's actually social distance between people. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mimiga. You've taken us to the next imperative. We've got 3 more imperatives that I'd like us to touch on before we leave. Imperative of HR processes. How does this impact HR processes? Imperative of business continuity management. And of course, the imperative of employee productivity. So to touch on all of this very quickly before we go into Q&A, I'd like us to go into HR processes. How will this, or how should HR practitioners be responding? Recruitment you've touched on, because I've had people chat me and ask questions from, should we be stopping any HR process? What about recruitment? What about training? People need to sit in one room at the same time. What about transferring employees and redeployment of staff? What should be the implication of COVID on these key HR processes? Mimiga has opened the door excellently to touch on resourcing. And I'm going to ask Shola to also touch on HR processes and what you've done, and Usain also very quickly so that we can cover all the processes. I do agree with you that stopping HR processes is perhaps not the immediate way to go because of the value that that process is adding to the organization. Any ideas and strategies, effective strategies you've deployed? Shola, could you share a couple with us? And then Usain after Shola.
All right, thank you again, Funke. Look, for us, this is an unusual time. And definitely there are some very unusual decisions that we will need to take. So for us, we canceled all our international trainings. So nobody is traveling to Switzerland, nobody is traveling to UK, nobody is traveling anywhere. Internally also, for training, of course, that we will need to bring some people together in the same class. More than 10, we stopped. Now there are some training in the factory, we call them essential trainings. This borders on quality, borders on safety. We cannot stop. But there again, we reduce the number of people that can attend at the point in time. So again, no more than 10, and they must gather in very big rooms where again we can space them out. We have also one very important program that we run that people need to go and attend in Switzerland. Now we've converted to virtual learning, so people are now doing it. People are doing it online. We've also stopped some transfers. Now as of yesterday, we said, look, if you are supposed to probably go on mission or transfer starting from expatriation starting from 1st of April, for instance, we've shifted this to 1st of June. So that gives us some ample time to observe what is happening. And for some of our employees also who are outside, they are supposed to be repatriated to come back home. Again, we've deferred some of them to say you stay where you are and give us some time. So instead of coming back at the end of this month, some of them will have to return probably beginning of June. So these are some of the steps that we've taken from HR perspective in terms of processes or in terms of actions that we take, just to ensure again that we control this. Now, let me quickly add, and I think this will be important for us. One thing again from today that we'll start implementing from Monday is split working. So we've decided again that we are splitting ourselves into teams. Again, just to reinforce that first part we share about social distancing. So we have team A and we have team B and we have team C. So starting from Monday, for instance, only team B will be in the office. Team A, they will work from home. Again, this will reduce effectively the number of people that will be in our head office, for instance. And we're also implementing this to some extent also in the factory to ensure also that we reduce the number of people that we have within our locations. These are some initiatives that are coming directly from HR just to ensure again that we support the business in this very important and delicate time.
Thank you very much, Shola. Still on the same subject. Oil and gas environment is an environment where we run a couple of shifts. So, you know, people are on and off 30 days off and 30 days on with your expatriates. What have you done differently with the COVID impact?
Thanks, Funke. So I was actually going to come to that. So one of the things we've done, for instance, is as much as possible, you want to keep people where they are right now. So for the guys who are in the field now, and you know that there is no exposure, you want to keep them for as long as is reasonably possible before you bring in new people. Now, for those who are coming in newly, particularly those coming in from overseas, what we're saying is that when they do come in, they still have to quarantine for 14 days before they go into the field. So this begins to have significant impact on the kind of shifts that are being run. So now in many cases, you no longer can do 14-14. You're going to have to move on to 28-28. And in some cases, to deliver that 28 days, you actually have 42 days because the individual first has to self-quarantine before they can even go into the field at all. So it's having a significant impact on the scheduling. But our starting point is where you know now that you don't have an exposure, you want to keep that as is for as long as possible. So minimize the shift changes right now and get people in preparation for them to go in, but they have to do the 14 days first before they go out into the field. And this is especially because of, the expatriate flow, and because of, in terms of, I think this is one time where we have the reverse importation of this virus at this point. So that's one of the things we're doing with Shift. And I think one of the key challenges we also have, I think for our industry, is also a double whammy. So you have the price of oil crashing as well. So you are actually having to rethink what is essential, what really needs to be going on right now, and where there are things that can be shut down, you shut them down. Where there are people that do not need to be in the field and can do a lot more work remotely, you actually limit the number of people that you're sending out into the field right now. So it's reassess what is critical, ensure only the essentials are in the field, and try and keep it safe for as long as you can, while you build in the health part of ensuring that the self-isolation process is also taking place.
Thank you very much, Alera. And we're moving quickly now so that we can take questions from our almost 400 HR colleagues that are logged on. Alera touched again on quarantine and self-isolation, which most of the other panelists have talked about. This has now become an HR process, which is not the traditional HR process we've done in the past. I'm going to want Dr. Jatto to tell us very quickly about this. What is the practical way to get started with sending an employee or advising an employee to go into a quarantine process and self-isolation? Dr. Jatto, very quickly, please.
First of all, the first thing is to determine that there was an exposure. So it's to how many staff or the staff that are impacted by possible exposure. And once you have that, then you determine the dates that exposure likely have taken place. And then from there, you calculate the 14 days quarantine that they're going, but they will be advised on that aspect that look, you're going to go into self-quarantine from such a date to such a date. And then the protocol to use while on quarantine is also should also be sent to them so that they are adequately guided on the do's and the don'ts while at home. And this protocol also separated into two. Are you living alone? If you are living alone, the protocol to follow will definitely be different from if you are living or sharing an apartment with some other persons. Will also be guided on that. So to specific do's and don'ts, what to do on a daily basis as a result of being in self-isolation if you are alone. And of course, one of the things that you must keep touch with your HR personnel, or in this case, as a doctor in Stanbic, I keep touch with it's a supervised self-quarantine that I know what's happening every day. Then of course, on a daily basis, twice a day, you record your temperature, morning and evening, record it to keep a chart of how you're doing. Of course, in that checkup on them, you ask questions, any headache, any in terms of the likely clinical presentations that could suggest that they are beginning to have symptoms, or tell them how to prepare, walk around the rooms, how to clean where they are self-isolating. And of course, there are some don'ts that you must not do while you are in self-isolation. You do not invite visitors home when you are in self-isolation. You do not go to public places when you are supposed to be isolating 100%. You do not use any form of transport you are in. And of course, you do your dishes, how you should do your dishes with hot water and all that, dry them. If you're using a dishwasher and all that, when you are living in a shared accommodation, it's very important that definitely there will be a communal kitchen. You that is in isolation will use that kitchen while others are using it. Because when you finish, that kitchen needs to be cleaned before others who are in that room. Of course, when you finish your meal, you take your meal to your room. You don't use the common area when you are sharing an apartment. You don't use the common area with the others who are in that same apartment. Of course, what to do when you start having symptoms, the hotline to do. But one thing we've also found that Usually self-isolation is a psychologically and emotionally draining time. And of course, an arrangement must be made to address that. In Stanbic IBTC, we already have a well-structured framework for employee assistance program, and the employee have the number of the employee assistance program service provider to call and chat. Probably you are feeling depressed, probably you are feeling emotionally drained. You just need to talk to a psychologist, you just need to talk to somebody, apart from probably also talking to your HRO personnel or to the doctor in the office. And it's somebody outside, the psychologist who is trained to help you get insights into why this is important, to reassure you that something, so we made that provision. And of course, at the end of the 14 days, no symptoms. We still feel that there should still be some form of medical evaluation. So we put something on ground to have a doctor have a chat and possibly have an evaluation of some basic investigations done before he or she is certified fit to return to work.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jatto. Very interesting times. Now an HR process called isolation and quarantine management. Most importantly for me is that we take it very seriously, and people don't just think is go away for 14 days and people just go at home and they're hobnobbing and going from place to place saying, I'm in isolation, I'm in quarantine. It's a risk management process that must be taken seriously. Having said that, I'd like Hussein to please give us a few ideas and thoughts around HR processes. We've heard some interesting insights from Shola and Bemiga. Resourcing in particular, I think, was very interesting. Something we've done is include this travel questionnaire, even in our onboarding pack. Resourcing processes, of course, moved online as much as possible, telephonically and by video conference, and then the travel questionnaire in the onboarding pack. You must declare all of your itinerary so that we know whether before you even resume into the office, you have to go into that isolation. So this risk management is continuous. Hussein, do you want to share some strategies with us, effective strategies for HR processes specifically?
I would speak to the HR processes, but there are two other key things I would also like to put on the table. The core HR processes, and like Shola rightly pointed out and Alero has spoken to, we are in uncharted waters. And so there's a framework, there's a mindset you must approach this situation with. And that mindset is really what is more important than the specifics, to be honest. All of us are speaking to prevention. We've all been speaking to preventing you contracting this virus. But the truth of the matter is, that is where we are today. In the next 10 days, we should be speaking to what do you do when you've contracted this virus? Because the numbers will go up. And so all the points Shola raised are very valid points. All the points Alero raised are very valid points. You don't need to be doing any interviews at this point. For the next 10 days, at least, no interviews at all. You shouldn't be hiring. If you've hired anybody, this is not when they should resume. You can postpone their resumption for 10 days. It won't shut down the business. When people are going on quarantine, you need to be sure that you put a human face to it. It isn't vacation. You can't charge a vacation. It is time off to manage your business risk. It is not vacation. But on the flip side of it, this is also the time to encourage people who have accrued vacation, who may wish to take time off to be with their family. This is the time to encourage them to take time off work. So it is more about the mindset with which you approach a situation as opposed to the specific HR processes. If you are doing transfers, right now, most of the airlines are shutting down. So the external factors even stop you from doing those transfers anyway. So it is thinking through, how do we put people at the center of this situation and understand that it's a global crisis, not a Nigerian crisis. I'd like us to speak specifically. A lot of us are speaking because we're big companies, but there are several SMEs out there that employ just 15 people, 20 people, and they are dealing with very, if you're dealing with a very matured management team, a very matured board, a lot of the things we're selling will fly. But if you're dealing with a small business where literally the survival of that business depends on daily turnover of cash, the challenge for the HR person to convince their management team about these initiatives we're talking about is much more difficult than in established organizations. How do we deal with that? When we self-quarantine, you can only self-quarantine when you have multiple rooms in your apartment. But the vast majority of our workers live in shared apartments. Sometimes you have 15 of them in a room, 20 of them in a room. How do you self-quarantine when you're living in Munshi or you're living in Oshodi and you're sharing an apartment with 5, 6, 7, 8 other people? So these are the practical challenges that we are going to face as HR people. And that is where the challenge really comes in. For those who live in the big apartments and all that, we can do those. I think the key is around educating people that this is not a life sentence if you do catch the virus. I mean, I was having our session yesterday, I think James is on this call, where we met with our management team, and we're like, look, you need to start thinking of the next big game, the next big thing you'll be talking about. If you do catch the virus, how do you deal with it? It is not a death sentence. What are the things you need to put in place to ensure that the well-being of the staff, when I say well-being, I'm talking about the mental well-being of the staff, is not damaged. This is not a life, it's not a death sentence if you catch coronavirus. There are protocols you have to execute. If you follow those protocols carefully, you will not only just protect your family, you will recover. From what I've gathered, it takes between 6 to 12 days for the entire virus to clear out of your system. It's not a death sentence. So we need to switch the conversation to how do we put our people ahead of the institutional processes and the HR processes to ensure that we manage the people, we manage their mindset, we assure them that to prevent, this is what you need to do. Should you contract, this is what you need to do. And you don't need to hit the panic button. You are not going to die in 10 days' time. We are not all going to die in 10 days' time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I like that, don't panic. And I think we have to ensure that our communication to our staff is very clear. Do not panic. It's not a time to panic. And I like your two agenda items, preventive, very big. Employee must understand, what do I need to do to prevent? Secondly, what do I need to do if indeed I do contract, which is the final thing. I'm going to be asking all panelists to please give us that one word that we think employees can do to prevent, or if they do contract, what should they be doing at the end of the session. But thank you very much for that, Hussein. And I like they put a human face to it. Somebody touched in very quickly to say that you should try and put together a do's and don'ts for the self-isolation period. I saw that from Henry. Thank you for that. And I think that's what Dr. Jatto was saying. Companies should try and put together the HR do's and don'ts so that people are educated when, if and when they do need to go into self-quarantine. I'm going to ask us to go into that space that Hussein touched on, which is business is in business to make money. There's a crux of business continuity management. Human capital has a big role to play in that. How do we ensure that our organizations can function in the movement? Should some people need to work at different locations, self-quarantine, flexi work? How do we ensure that continuity is preserved? What is critical to the business is preserved in all of this. Use keeps reminding us that things could get worse. Bimiga, would you like to help us get the conversation started on this HR imperative, business continuity management?
Okay, thanks, Funke. Look, the BCP is more or less like organizations preparing for the worst scenario. And essentially, when you are preparing for your BCP, you are looking at different scenarios. One, this scenario of if there's a reduced number of employees that will actually work for the organization. Second one, if your site or maybe a critical function is actually affected, and then you need to plan how to manage, to operate without those sites being up and running, or whether that function is actually operating. And probably the worst one is if there's a total lockdown by even the government saying, okay, everybody, nobody is moving outside, you understand? So in doing all those one, the BCP itself is about planning for the worst thing that will ever happen. And the essential thing is that you need to be able to identify what are your essential services, what are those business critical services that you still need to continue to prepare for. Because whether you like it or not, businesses are still going to go over this at a particular time. There will be a peak time when this thing will go up and then it start coming back. And businesses need to still be in business, and that is why it's called a business continuity plan. You can't take out some of your services and says, look, I'm going to stop it forever. But as long as you identify what are those risks, what are those critical business services that we still need to be planning for, what are those business critical roles that I need to provide for, how can I support the organization working from either remote working or alternative ops? How do you ensure that even if something happens today in the office, or you get to know that an employee is affected by the COVID-19, what is the reaction? Because one of the things that we did, because we did a test run of our BCP 2 days ago, is that now everybody now started bringing up different scenarios of what they've actually not talked about. Because sometimes everybody thinks that we are ready, especially when you are doing a tabletop exercise on your BCP. When you try it out, that is where you start seeing something that actually nobody has thought about. For instance, you can actually have employees that you think are actually on VPN. That is, being able to work remotely. And they now start doing it, and suddenly they can't even get onto the company's network itself. If you don't try it and test out your BCP, then you can wait for when it's actually going to happen, because that particular role can actually be a plug in the wheel of your business processes itself. So it's very essential that your BCP well planned but well tested out before we start getting into the worst scenarios. And you can't wait and say, look, okay, it has not happened. You need to test so many scenarios in your BCP for you to be sure that if we get to the worst stage, you can actually cope and the business can continue.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to ask Alero to help us in going further on the BCP. How do we identify the mission critical roles in HR that need to perhaps work from an alternate location to ensure that should one location go down, there will be continuation of the HR function, going forward into the future?
Thanks, Funke. And I think I'll probably take it a bit beyond the HR function alone. I think when Usain said, don't panic, and I listened to Bemiga, the answer to not panicking is planning. And that means it's preemptively looking across the board to say what is key and what actually needs to be done in the office. So it's us working with each of the line managers, going through each of our employees and saying, for this role, who needs to be here and what can be done remotely? And always keeping at the back of our mind that our strategy is to keep it to the barest minimum. There's always a tendency for us to want to go, oh, I need everybody around me. But this is a scenario where you're starting from, if you're not going to get anybody in the office, who are the one or two that are really essential? Because as you've seen in other parts of the world, when things shut down, you really don't have, that is not the time to start having the conversations around who is going to stay or how you're going to manage all of that workforce. So I think it's really essential that you start on the basis of the barest minimum. So even if you come into the HR function, you're saying, what is actually essential for me to keep around at this time? And really the person you need the most is your focal point on your business continuity program. So who is the HR person that is going to be championing this? What kind of protocol are we going to put in place for communicating within HR, for communicating with a larger employee body? And how do we ensure, I think one of the things we've done is, as much as possible, move all the communication into the technology space. So making sure that your Snapchats, all of those things work so that you can reach people promptly, and making sure that you have your protocols in terms of address list, which group sits in what bucket, so that you can reach them at the touch of a button. I would always say start with the barest minimum. Assume, and even if possible, assume nobody is able to get into the office. What other mechanisms do you have for making contact? What other mechanisms do you have for establishing that work continues? The other point I wanted to make, given the opportunity, is recognizing that actually the reality for a lot of business continuity is that some businesses are going to be shutting down or almost shutting down. So even right now in the fair, the fears that people are dealing with are varied. You have the fear of your health, you have the fear of the impact on your family, but this also comes with a large fear on livelihood. Because as you've seen in other parts of the world, businesses are shutting down. What does this mean for people? How do we help the business in itself begin to think in advance of what can be done to mitigate the impact? So right now, maybe there are cases where you want to be telling people, we begin to slowly migrate to reduce pay, reduce hours. We need to come up with creative solutions that allows the businesses to survive on the long run and also help people manage a all or nothing situation that that could be impending, between we have a job and we don't have a job. Are there strategies we can put in place? And for those who can afford to, I know there are companies now who are looking at how do we pay people also in advance so that they can begin to, prepare for their households for all kinds of eventualities. And in the midst of all of that, the organization is looking to us as HR people to come up with those ideas that can ameliorate impact of all of these on our people. But I think from the people's side, always work on the basis of the minimum possible. Plan for the worst and hope for the best.
Thank you very much, Alero. And I like the spin that you brought into it, which is a business-driven HR perspective. How do we begin to get things to the OD level and rethink the organization more or less? And how do we begin to help the organization make that shift around that, the bigger construct of the business continuity? Do we need to begin to look very quickly at how jobs can be designed to give us the impact that we're looking for, how jobs can be merged, how we can be leaner and slimmer and actually still achieve the objectives, which takes me to our last imperative, which is the subject of employee productivity, because we know that very linked to productivity is the performance of the business. Now, all of our panelists are in very big organizations, but USAID helped us to remember that there are SMEs, small, medium enterprises, who really are looking at things and they're wondering, am I really going to be able to record any single profits this year? So the subject of employee productivity, what can you share around practical experiences and strategies that organizations can begin to consider around how do we ensure that we can at least keep our head above waters to remain productive and still be able to meet some business objectives? And in the event that business objectives are very, very impacted, what are the options? I'd like the panelists to please give this very, very quick shots so that we can wrap up and get to answer a number of questions. I already see very exciting questions coming in that I'd like to be able to take. I'd like to start with Gbemiga very quickly. Employee productivity, what are the concerns that we think our businesses are experiencing now? People are calling me every day asking, people are going to be working a lot of flexi work is being forced on us. Okay, how can we be even encouraged and assured that productivity would not come crashing down? Gbemiga, please help us.
Okay, so look, I think when people look at it from the fact that big organizations have all these plans, and then the SME will not have all these plans. It's also about SME is also making plans, because you don't know what is going to happen, and even as SMEs, you also need to plan and also be as flexible as much as possible. And if anybody is having challenges with, let's say, the owner of the business that doesn't understand that, you know, at the end of the day, it is the people that will be required to deliver this productivity, then we need to now start talking about, okay, are we actually saying the right thing to the owners for them to understand better in terms of our influencing skill? The owners themselves need to agree that, you know, there's going to be an impact. And how do I address this? And more or less the same practices. You may not be able to implement most of the practices that big organizations will do, but there's still something that will happen. For instance, if there's a total shutdown of companies in Nigeria and everybody is going to be doing remote working, how are you prepared? The SMEs will also need to go home. The SMEs needs to provide the working tools at home. The SMEs needs to plan for, if I can't operate in this particular location, where do I to? If the SMEs is providing services to the populace, to the population, do they need to stop? It is about planning, because nobody is sure what is going to happen. So you need to cover every little space and be able to, you want to do remote working, you want to stock up your products, you want to engage with your vendors, because you probably need to depend on vendors or third-party persons. And have you talked to the person to know that even if I'm going to continue with my own business, as small as it is, the person that I'm depending upon is also ready with his own plan? Because it's all those little things that everybody needs to sit down and start thinking about. And it is whatever, either because it's been done by a large company, you are basically just scaling it down to your own level and saying, which is that thing that I can do that will make me continue in business? Because at the end of the day, I'm still going to be operating. For some of the SME companies, it's essentially maybe probably easier.
She just doesn't want like a top bed, bunk bed, and then you use the bottom for reading and all that.
Oh, I think we're having some disruption now coming through.
Okay. Okay. So essentially, just for me to round up, is that, you know, it's just about planning and also being flexible
Yeah, I know those words.
as to what we are doing.
Please, can you mute your buttons if you're not talking? Thank you, Beniga. We see the emphasis on planning.
Okay.
I see you know, the chat buttons, there's quite a lot of contributions coming in that I'm seeing. And someone easily just said, listen.
What about a reading area for her? She doesn't want a reading area.
Somebody needs to mute their phones. There's a lot coming through, a lot of this.
And then wardrobe. You don't, are able to get a smaller wardrobe in there now?
Osen, can you please mute your microphone?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. So here we go. I'm going to ask a few of the other panelists to give us their views around productivity, the concern around, we're hearing from the business, we're hearing from the employees, concerns everywhere, a lot of pressure everywhere. I hear some of the comments on our chat room. I hear Abiba saying, even if you're a small, medium enterprise and you don't have all the time to do the planning, you can learn from the big ones and just get all your, get your action going, because this has come upon us with such urgency. Can I ask Usain, give us your very quick views on productivity? What should we, Dangote is a very big enterprise. So what are the concerns around the business in terms of productivity, and what can we be doing at this time to assuage those concerns? We've had some techie stuff around the OD, redesigning jobs, rethinking, cutting costs, and all of that. What can we be doing to support the business differently?
Okay, I'll speak to two things. I don't know if you can hear me. I'll speak to two things.
Yes,
what
we
you
can hear.
do if you're a big corporate, and what you should do if you're an SME. If you're a big corporate, the first thing you should do is realize that you have to revise your forecast. It's just the facts. You have to revise your forecast. Is the reality. This is, pardon if this is a bit of an exaggeration, this is a near war situation. I hope we don't get to that situation, but there are countries that have literally been shut down by this. So clearly, you have to revise your forecast. Now, whether you're an SME or you're a big corporate, the fact is your forecast will be impacted. understanding that then makes you begin to take meaningful and logical decisions around how you manage your people. And then as HR professionals, we need to make sure that our principals understand that it is people first. You cannot chase forecast in crisis situation, in a situation where, or in a manner that puts your people at risk. So it is people first. In fact, I would push it further to say, if you actually do manage this crisis well, you could significantly, this could be an opportunity for you to significantly improve your employee morale by how you deal with them in this crisis. So it's understanding that and communicating that. So employee productivity, you have to use the technologies you have. If you're a big scale company, I assume that you must have some technologies that allow remote working. Use those to the maximum effect at this time. If you're an SME, I think Beniga summarized it properly. If you're an SME, then this is when you need to be pushing your products out as aggressively as you can into the hands of your distributors to be sure that should a lockdown happen, the final mile can be covered even in your absence.
Sorry, can I come in here and ask your views on this so that we can get this really practical? What is the place of digital in all of this? We've been saying that's the future, technology is the future, it's upon us. What is the place of digital in all of this?
That is the specific thing I spoke about. Let me give you practical examples. And I guess I'm allowed to mention them because it's one of the companies that I mentor. This is a solar company that, based on this crisis, a lot of their processes are automatic. Their customer service is online, their selling is online, their HR services is online to their people. Their people are always on the field. In fact, I saw a question where someone said they've got a lot of field operators. A lot of these are digital, but there is a major problem here. They actually sometimes do commutes to the office. Commuting in public transportation, if there is truly an outbreak, if an outbreak truly happens, it's a major risk. And what has the company done? Starting from yesterday, they've completely said, do not come to work, work remotely. Because what do you need to come to work for? You can support from your phone, and we do have the technology to monitor whether you are taking customer calls or not. So you can't hide. You can make HR requests from home. That is what digital is about. It's about enhancing your ability to be productive without you physically being present. You've got those tools, you use them to the maximum effect. And if you haven't made those investments, example, if you have a small scale company that you barely have an email and your email is a public email, then clearly they may not have made those kinds of investments yet. This is when you then, for the little window you've got, and I keep saying that window is probably just about 2 weeks. This is when you push your products to the last mile. Take the cost of pushing your products out to the last mile, and let's pray that you get the best, because once your products are at the last mile, then you can sell.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's what we want to hear. Push your products to the last mile, leverage the digital platforms and optimize your reach, optimize your spread. I think these are exciting times for us to really discover what is possible. I'm going to ask Shola to please help us with this question, which I saw pop through, which is, how do we track productivity of staff when half of your population is working offline, flexi time? How do we track productivity of staff? Many HR professionals are getting their CEOs asking them these questions at this time. We need to help ourselves to position appropriately before Mr. and Mrs. CEO that productivity can be tracked. Shola, your views on this, please.
Thank you so much again, Funke. Look, for me, this is very critical at this time. I think one of us mentioned earlier that working from home at this time is not holidays. And one of the ways we can ensure that it's not holiday is to ensure that there are clear deliverables. So you are working from, it's like when you're in the office, there are expectations of the work that you are doing. So the same way, if you are working remotely, the only difference is, yes, your supervisor is not seeing you directly, and then assuming that you need to do your job. Otherwise, even in the office, it's not that your line manager is sitting on your neck when you are doing your job. What measures your productivity are your deliverables? What are the expectations? So even if you are working remotely, I expect the company, your line manager, to set specific targets. There are expectations. Then remember also, in the way our jobs are linked, your input is an input for someone else. So what that presupposes is that if you don't do your job, whether you are working remotely or you are in the office, the other guy will not be able to get his input for him to do his own job. So meaning that if you are away and you are not doing your bit, of course the gap will be there. Because the guy who needs your input, your output as an input, he will not get it. And clearly we will know that you are not doing your job. So for me, I think at this time, as part of our communication, if people are going to work off-site, it is important that people know that they are not on vacation. Working on-site means you are working on-site. However, it is important, and we must especially also as HR, you must provide, to your possible extent, the enabling environment for people to work off-site. If an employee does not have access to internet at home, he does not have internet at home, and you are asking him to work off-site, I don't know how he's going to work off-site. If your employee today is not having a laptop, he uses a desktop, and you say he's going to work off-site, again, I don't know how you want him to work off-site. So, to that extent, you must also ensure that the employee is empowered to be able to work off-site. Give the employee the tools to be able to work off-site, and at the same time, set clear deliverables, expectations from this employee. And of course, for organizations like ours, there are consequences if you don't deliver on your targets. So this should be very clear, and HR should provide the direction in this area to our line managers. If we do this, then I want to think that working from home will actually be working from home. It will not just be another day in disguise. Thank you
very much, Shola. Thank you, Shola. And I think one last thing, there's a question here that says, should we structure pay differently during remote working scenario? We're now in the question and answer period. So our 391 colleagues online, please post your questions. We're going back and pick up questions from here. We definitely can't take all the questions, but we'll as much as possible take them. Shola, do you want to touch on that? Does it mean I should pay a different salary or compensation because they're working remotely?
When you say pay differently, look, there are two legs to this. There are those who are saying that probably you should already pay, for instance, you should already pay much salary by now so that people can stock and all that. Now there are those who is talking, look, because I'm working remotely. Very senior colleague called me 2-3 days ago. I was talking about, okay, if I need to work remotely, look, I need diesel to power my generator at home. I need to pay for my internet. So what is the company going to do about this? At this point, let me speak for my organization at this point. The expectation at this point is not to probably set up a new pay structure for the purpose for the fact that you're working from home. But like I've said, if there are areas we need to support you, for instance, we mentioned to some of our staff, if the modem we give to you today is not working well in your area, and you have your own internet that you need to fund for you to be able to work well, yes, please do that, and you will be reimbursed for such an expense. Now, again, if you use staff bus, for instance, and for some reasons, you now need to commute and the staff bus is not available, again, we will reimburse you. So we will try to probably pay for some out of pocket that employee will incur as a result of whatever inconveniences and disinputs that you may have suffered because you are working remotely. However, we are not going to necessarily restructure the way you are paid. We are not necessarily going to do anything that is fundamental to your pay structure. It will be like Bemiga will say in the industry, it will be on pay-as-you-go basis, depending on what you spend in this particular situation. But it's nothing that is going to change fundamentally in the way we structured our pay today.
Thank you, Shola. Very, very Time for creativity in HR thinking. I see a question here. We've been doing a lot of talking about working from home, but still on the subject, assuming it's a partial number of the workforce. How about 100% situation of work from home? Hussein, help us. How do we plan? How do we scenario manage this? You've touched a few times on total lockdown, and some countries are already in a total lockdown situation. What should be the HR, what's the HR imperative, the total lockdown? What should we be saying to our employees? What should we be saying to our to our CEs, our management, you know, from an accountability perspective? Your thoughts around total lockdown, 100% lockdown?
If we do go into a total lockdown, and I am very prayerful that we don't get into that situation. If we do go into a total lockdown situation, there are two sides to the story. The first side is the business would have to look at how well it can absorb the losses and for how long it can absorb the losses, because there will be losses. And dependent on the robustness of that business, you may want to consider continue to pay your staff even in that lockdown mode and ensure that compensation doesn't go down. Then obviously on both sides, you have to also then look at all of the things around. It's not the time to be talking about salary increases. It's not the time to be talking about promotions. It's not the time to be talking about bonuses. But then you also should try very hard not to have to cut salaries. But then there's a stage where if this gets prolonged, and I keep saying, I hope not. But if this gets prolonged, then we will lose jobs. And then the company needs to start thinking, what are the ways we can reduce all costs, not just staff costs, in a manner that is humane, knowing that these are our staff. It isn't their fault that we have a crisis. It isn't a performance issue, and they are loyal to us, but we do have a business reason. The business is dying, so you need to cut costs. How can we humanely cut that cost to ensure that we can give our employees a fighting chance to go through this crisis, even if we do have to cut costs? But before you even get to that point, you may want to, and I've seen organizations do this, you may want to say, look, we are all collectively going to take that hit. So you reduce salaries across board, which elongates how long you can keep the business and the people running through a crisis period before you have to take those difficult decisions. But we as HR professionals need to be totally pragmatic about this. If we go into a meltdown, there would be need to scale back. We need to start getting very creative about how we do that scale back in a very humane manner. And we place the interest of our staff and how they manage that crisis themselves. We place that forward, place that in front. We haven't gone as far as stimulating those scenarios yet. I can't say we have done that. We haven't done that yet. But if, let's see, like I keep saying, the next 2 weeks is going to define how this evolves. I'm very hopeful that so long as the crisis doesn't get out of the two major airport cities, we can manage this as a country. If it doesn't get out of those two airport cities, we should be able to manage this as a country. So people don't need to panic. I'm not sure that scenario would be something we need to worry about, at least for another 1 month.
Thank you very much, Hussein. One very important point at this moment, human capital, HR cannot afford to panic, because when HR panics, the entire organization will panic. Absolutely. So Hussein has reiterated that we need to be positive about this, and we need to be evidently in charge to be sure that, look, we do pray that this doesn't get out of hand, but we must ensure that the workforce does not panic. Still on that note, I'm going to ask Alero to please help us with this. Very interesting question. How do we manage stigmatization of our workforce in the event that self-isolate, or we ask that they be quarantined in an environment where people are easily stigmatized even after, whatever it is that they've gone through and they come back to the office. How do we, what are your thoughts around that, Alera?
I think there are two things. It goes one with the education that we talked about earlier. So in terms of making sure that people know that this runs a cycle, and if you pull through, you have pulled through. So it is not as if 1 month or 2 months further on, you're still contagious. So I think the education is really important. I think it's also important that we maintain confidentiality as much as is possible. This is not the time to put people's medical stories out there. So as much as it can be contained, we really need to be, we really need to manage confidentiality. I think also as this evolves, we would begin to have stories of survivors, and you're seeing that all over the internet now, people who have been through it and being able to tell a story and put a positive spin on it. So actually you can get to situations where going through it doesn't stigmatize you as much as it almost makes you a hero to have gone through that process in a responsible manner. What steps did you take in terms of making sure that you're not passing it on and all of that? So there is a positive slant that really can be put to this. So I think we just have to focus on the education and where possible, tell the positive stories. But just listening across as well, I just want to make a point, because I think there's also a level of advocacy that we need to be making now as HR people. One, I'm almost certain that this pandemic is going to redefine the nature of work going forward. So when we talk about issues of productivity, to be honest, the productivity weaknesses are emphasized in this period. But the key thing is that they already exist. Organizations that are fully productive are productive whether they're face-to-face or they're virtual. So really, it begins to point to some of the underlying performance issues that we need to be defining as we go on. And I like the point Shola made. It's about what are the deliverables, what are the targets. So we really need to focus on that. The other point I was making about advocacy is that you see that in all the other countries where there are shutdowns, the government is stepping in to look for ways in which they can support businesses and organizations, support their populace through the businesses and organizations. And we need to be thinking as well to say, what kind of intervention can we advocate for that provides support to, to the generality of our people? Is it about transport systems? What is it that is required right now to make life easier for people within our community? And that means that the conversations as this one needs to go further than just our immediate organizations, but begin to look at what kind of themes do we, what kind of social corporate social responsibility actions we expect to take as organizations to support people who are not even directly working for us, and what advocacy do we need to be making through the government to provide support for people at this time.
Thank you very much, Alera, for taking us into the space of sustainability, into the space of corporate social responsibility, individual employee social responsibility. Great thinking going on. When HR practitioners begin to pay attention to all of this, then we indeed are making a strategic contribution to the management of this global crisis. I have a question here in the space of stakeholder management, and I would like one of our panelists to help us with influencing skills. How do we as HR practitioners bring our influencing skills to the table to effectively manage all stakeholders that must enable us, bring our best management to this workplace management? Somebody says here, I work with a small scale business. And when this COVID news went viral, I got a mail from the HMO on the need to enlighten staff and provide sanitizers, but my MD saw it as a waste of money. So some of these initiatives we talked about would have cost imperatives. Sanitizers, handheld thermometers, and all of that. How do we think that some of our colleagues can bring the best of their influencing skills to the table to convince stakeholders on initiatives that may have cost implications, or this work from home that many may think negatively about? How would we think that the average HR director should voice out in this regard, particularly when a CE comes to say that's a waste of money at this time?
Actually, Funke, I think we should tell the SME person who has the question that the big corporates also face the exact same challenge. We are all facing the same challenge. It is always a cost and benefits. But the truth of the matter is your biggest weapon in having a convincing argument is staying informed. It's making sure that you have the facts. Let me give 2 examples. If your MD or CEO said, look, putting sanitizers is a waste of money, all you need to do is just simply show them a scenario in which 70% of the staff take ill. It would far exceed the cost of sanitizers. It's just just simply the facts. The other thing is also at the time of crisis, most CEOs are looking for allies, but they're looking for informed allies. Mm-hmm. So if you're coming to the table with not just an understanding of what is going on, the implication on the business, the practical steps you can take and the costs, and how that relates to the alternative, which is do nothing, you will almost definitely get a seat on the table. I would share a personal example. I don't think it's confidential. We have put in place a robust framework for managing this. James spoke about that. But we are also looking at the scenario that supposing right now in Lagos, we have one facility that has a 60-bed capacity to manage this crisis. It's in Yaba. As of today, we probably have, 14, 15, I don't know how many people. If the numbers rise, you can see that within 5 days or 4 days now, we will exceed that 60-bed capacity. What happens? What would happen then? So a scenario was painted yesterday at the meeting, our briefing yesterday, where how about we now make an investment in building out a 24-bed capacity makeshift place where if this crisis hits, at least for those that are over 60, who are the high-risk people, because not everybody that catches this illness has to go into quarantine or be isolated, as long as you can have a place to treat. So what about the critical ones that have need for breathing assistance? If one of our staff should catch that and the Yaba facility is filled, what do you do? And when you actually look at it, apart from the oxygen and the ventilators, all the other things are basic things, just bed and making sure that there's ventilation. So when you have a premises and you get those equipments in, and I'm told apparently from the doctor, she's still on here, that these things can be bought in Nigeria. But that is the scenario planning that Funke is referring to. You need to then say, what do you do if that happens? Now, immediately that came up, the first thing was, hey, why do you have to do that? It's going to cost us an amount of money. But then we just simply did an analysis. How many people do you have in just your head office that are over 60 years? If you look at that and say, if you were to lose 50% of these people, what would be the impact on your business compared to how much it will cost you to fit out this facility? So even if you fit out the facility and none of our people fall ill, would that be cheaper than losing 50% of that workforce? Those are the numbers you need to put through. And those are the arguments you need to have. You won't win all the arguments, but you would win some. Mm-hmm. The idea is to take it one step at a time. You won't win all the arguments.
Thank you very much, Hussein. Okay. It's about numbers are here. I'm coming to you now, Alera, so you're going to have the floor. the last question before I take parting words from all the panelists. But I hear that question clearly is about numbers. Business understands numbers. So play around with your numbers to bring the point out, to ensure that data does not lie. When the business then sees your point, your facts, your influencing skills then get to the optimum. Alero, we have a question here. I think you should take the floor and answer the question quickly for us. Then I'll go around and ask the panelists to begin to give us their final words. And the question brings us to the domestic front. All employees have their various homes. So we can do all of this in the workplace, or maintain hygiene standards, or put all the sanitizers around, insist that people wash their hands, give them the facilities to wash their hands, do the cleaning. What is your advice on the domestic front? What should we be saying to our employees that they should do? They go home from Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then come back to the workplace on Monday. What really can we do to extend to the domestic front? I wanted Alero to please help us with that, and then we'll go around everyone. Alero, also give us your final words when you do that. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Funke. I think the first thing was I wanted to say, in addition on influencing, is similar to the call we had today, is making sure that there are experts in the room as well. So many times, as part of getting our story across and getting our leaders on our side, we might not always have the credibility of the professional context. So I think going to those meetings with your medical officer, people that they would defer to because of the credibility, I think enhances our influence. So let's not try to do it alone. And I think what we had on the call today is a good example of leveraging on the resources that are available. On the domestic front, I think clearly everybody needs to have, as you educate in the office, is also important that you give people takeaways that can be shared at home. So when you're talking about sessions that you're running for your employees, it's also important that you have takeouts that they can also share with their house helps, their cooks, their drivers, and basically monitoring that. One of the things I am suggesting, even for my own staff, is that for those who stay with you, you also want to minimize their exposure. So as much as possible, you want to make sure that this is not the season where your nannies are going and coming. As much as possible, negotiate, even if it means paying a premium or a stipend, that when they come in, they stay in, so that you minimize the contacts that they have. But it's also important that they are educated as to what this means, what they need to be doing, and what are the possible implications for themselves. So I think giving them the takeout is really important. I think in terms of final words, I think the key thing for us as HR people, has been said severally, is that we need to be sure in all of these discussions, we ensure that the people are kept central, and that for once, the well-being, the health of our employees is paramount at this time. Unfortunately, I think as Hussein said, there will be losses. We need to ensure that we keep people central, we educate them, we support them, and that we're also flexible. This is actually not the season for the stick. This is a period for us to engage, support, and help people through what is a particularly difficult situation. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Alero. Final words from our panelists in this order. I'd like to take Gbemiga, Hussein, and then Shola, and we will be rounding up. It's been a very long day, and we've had some excellent strategies of workplace management in the COVID-19 scenario. Can we have final words from Gbemiga?
Okay, good. Thanks, Frank. I think this is the time for HR to show leadership. If to be candid, we should be the focal point of your business continuity program. You should actually be the consultant and be driving this from the business continuity framework. And I think the other bit of it is also the fact that at the moment, this is a very good chance for you to also drive up employee engagement. because of the way you approach this. Like Calero said, this is not the time to be rigid. You have to be flexible and be willing to show empathy and listen to so many scenarios that is going to come up for people to really appreciate that this organization is actually putting us as the real point of doing this business. And finally, I think from me, communication is very key. Communication, you also need to plan, and you also need to be prepared for this, because you never know. Every day, everything changes. As long as you are prepared for the different scenarios, we should all be good. And let's all be safe.
Thank you, Gbemiga. And Usai, final words?
My message would be to my colleagues, both in your professional capacity and as family men and women, don't panic. It's not remotely the end of the world. Don't panic at all. We will get through this. It may seem here now because of all of the news you're reading or hearing from CNN and all that. But the truth of the matter is, in some ways, we are quite isolated. And so we will get through this. So do not panic. Listen to all of the advice from the experts. Take your personal hygiene seriously. And if you are not really one of those who have taken time to take care of yourself, this is the time to really take care of yourself. Boost your personal immunity up and just assume that if this thing hits you, within 6 days, your body will take care of it. So you cannot afford to let anxiety rob you of your internal strength. And by the time you then need the strength to take care of a loved one or to take care of yourself, your panic and your worry has actually robbed you of strength. It really isn't, there's really absolutely nothing to panic about. Focus on your personal health, stay healthy, do your exercise, boost your immunity, and obey the simple instructions that are being put out by the medical experts, and you'll be fine. Work would always come back. Economies would always bounce back. And it is a long-term game. COVID will not be here in another 6 months, 7 months, max. So relax.
Thank you very much, Gbemiga. I'm sorry, Usai. And then finally from Shola. Hello, Shola.
Yes, so in addition to what the panelists have said, I think it's important we remain informed. And in addition to flexibility, we should also be very proactive in supporting the business and also in supporting our employees at this time. Why at this stage we more or less we are living a day at a time, I think it's also important that as part of our planning, we also plan for the worst, so that we are not compared if things should go from current situation to worse situation. Let's ensure that we fine-tune our business continuity plan, because in all of this, the business will still have to continue, and our expectation is that this will go and the business will still be there. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our esteemed panelists and colleagues. I see we have 391 people logged on. Thank you very much for your time spent in this very exhaustive session. We've spent the time looking at the HR imperatives of COVID-19. We've looked at business continuity management, travel management, risk management, employee well-being, employee productivity. We've also touched on communication as being very, very critical at a time like this. We've encouraged ourselves to go digital as much as possible, leverage digital. We've looked at the imperative on HR processes and what we need to do differently. Travel management has come up very big on the agenda for us, and we've said as HR practitioners, we should not panic. So my final words before I hand over to our CE for CIPM is to say, this is the time to explore what we've been clamoring for as the future of work. Let's allow technology to make our lives easier at a time like this as HR practitioners. Let's push our HR processes to technology. Let's ensure we're technology enabled, push them digital as much as possible. Let's be the employee advocates that we should be at a time like this. Hussein has charged us. Let's be humane. Let's bring ourselves into the room like this could be me, and ensure that our employees have a listening ear, a shoulder to lean on, someone to cry on, someone to cry to, and a voice to speak on their behalf, an advocate, and for their working and for the business. Let's put on all our business cap. Let's put on the strategic business partner cap. Let's put on the employee advocate cap. Let's help the business manage change at this time, and let's help be the voice in the room that keeps the business running. I'd like to thank the CIPM leadership for enabling this kind of webinar. I'd like to thank Mr. President for helping us get started with this and giving us that very good charge. And I'd like to hand over to our CE, Busola Alofe, who's also been a very, very key driver of this process.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you very much to our host and to all the panelists for giving us this time. We're in the middle of what are some very critical and previously unseen, unexperienced times. We're all learning from what's going on, and I'm sure after COVID has gone back to where it came from, there will be some very important after action reviews. I have a few words, and very, very prime on my mind is the fact around we are facing disruption, period. Over the past few years, we've been talking about disruption from technology, digitalization, digital transformation. Well, here is disruption from a different dimension, infectious disease on a global scale happening all at the same time. And I think that at the back of our minds must be the fact that, well, tomorrow it might be something else. And that speaks to the importance of having business continuity plans in our organizations and all the things that we have heard this morning. For me, very importantly is, like I think it was Hussein that said it, it is a people first time. If we woke up tomorrow and the next village had been planning for the past 3 months to come and ambush our village, like we watch on Africa Magic, sometimes if you watch Africa Magic, they've been planning a war, and the next morning we wake up to find all the agile young men of the village tied up with some strangers holding rifles and marching them out of the village. And you will see dead bodies littering the streets. What would we do? Because COVID has come overnight and it has met us where we are. What would we do? Would we say, oh, my company, my business, my productivity, my profit, I need to appraise people, I plan to recruit people? Those will not be the thoughts on our mind. Essentially, we will be thinking survival. I must survive, we must survive. And so I want to encourage all of us to take very seriously the different things we've heard today, and to practical various locations at work and at home. We must not be the person that infects somebody else, which means all those precautions are very important. As an MD, I must not be the MD that does not allow my team, my staff to work remotely because I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about that, to the extent that somebody comes to the office and infects 30 staff or 10 staff. So everyone has to put forward our hands collectively. It's a collective responsibility to keep everybody safe and to make sure that this virus stops spreading and stops spreading very fast. Very importantly, we must not panic. It's important because fear in the mind makes illness very easy to take over our body, our minds. And, I also think about people that are at home who may have had their friends or family ill from COVID. Such people cannot be at their best, will not be as productive as in a normal situation. And again, that means we have to really focus on empathy and our employee assistance programs. This is a people-first time. I want to enjoin all of us to focus on that in all our actions daily. As Alero said, it is not stiff, stiff, stiff. What if they abuse this process? What if they do that? This is the time to take action, understanding that honestly, we are at war against COVID. So I wish us all well. I wish our organizations well. I wish us as individuals well. I wish our friends, our families, our colleagues well. Let us rise up collectively to do what we must do to win the war against COVID. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Hello.
They can hear you.
Okay. We thank you all for your time, the very interactive session. And to write on what my CEO said, I'm sure it was very, very insightful. I'm sure we gained new ways on how to actually handle the epidemic right now. At the same time, I'm sure we actually got very, very good points, like what Mr. Hussein said. It's not a matter of getting ready. It's a matter of getting ready when we get infected. So I would like to say thank you once again. But before we do end the session, we would like to talk about our webinar, which will be holding next week, Thursday. The topic is on when the resumes for duty. Now, the facilitator for the session will be Dr. Maimuna Kadiri. The time for the webinar will be from 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. We please implore you to all register and come on and learn new ways on handling depression when resuming for duty. So at this point in time, we would like to end the session with a video on being positive and not to panic, as we hope that things will eventually be fine. This video is by the British Broadcasting Company, BBC Radio, London. And on this, my name is Ibitayo Ogunbanwo, and on behalf of the CIPM, we say a very big thank you. Please listen to the video, as it really does help, and it gives a lot of very insightful points on how to handle fear and panic.
Yes, there is fear. Yes, there is isolation. Yes, there is panic buying. Yes, there is sickness. Yes, there is even death. But they say that in Wuhan, after so many years of noise, you can hear the birds again. They say that after just a few weeks of quiet, the sky is no longer thick with fumes, but blue and grey and clear. They say that in the streets of Assisi, people are singing to each other across the empty squares, keeping their windows open so that those who are alone may hear the sounds of family around them. They say that a hotel in the west of Ireland is offering free meals and delivery to the housebound. Today, a young woman I know is busy spreading flyers with her number through the neighbourhood so that the elders may have someone to call on. Today, churches, synagogues, mosques and temples are preparing to welcome and shelter the homeless, the sick, the weary. All over the world, people are slowing down and reflecting. All over the world, people are looking at their neighbours in a new way. All over the world, people are waking up to a new reality, to how big we really are, to how little control we really have, to what really matters, to love. So we pray and we remember that yes, there is fear, but there does not have to be hate. Yes, there is isolation, but there does not have to be loneliness. Yes, there is panic buying, but there does not have to be meanness. Yes, there is sickness, but there does not have to be disease of the soul. Yes, there is even death, but there can always be a rebirth of love. Wake to the choices you make as to how to live now. Today, breathe. Listen. Behind the factory noises of your panic, the birds are singing again. The sky is clearing. Spring is coming. And we are always encompassed by love. Open the windows of your soul. And though you may not be able to touch across the empty square, see.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. And at this point in time, I would like to say bye-bye and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes, there is panic buying.